Hi. So today we're going to talk about producing an effective resume. And I'm very passionate about this because I had terrible resumes for years because I really didn't know any better. And really, I was just following the model that I got from one of my faculty members who was not out there actively looking at resumes. And so, as great as this faculty member was, that was not the resume that I should have been following because there are always new innovations in resumes, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Anyway, let's get started with this. So here we go. So as far as resumes in general, the purpose is not to get you the job of a resume. The purpose really is just to introduce you and hopefully to get an interview. This is going to be the same whether it's for a graduate program or a career. So the other thing we need to know is that's important about the resume is that we need to make sure we emphasize our strengths, but really minimize any potential liabilities we may have. And I'll show you a couple of examples of this in just a bit. It's probably the most important part of this whole presentation. Next, we would like to think that resumes are going to be really read very carefully. The truth is that's not the case. Used to, they would say that resumes are read for 60 seconds, and then it went down to 30 seconds. But a couple of recent eye tracking studies found that professional recruiters, when they're looking at a stack of resumes, they look at that resume initially for 7, maybe 8 seconds on average. And I personally would agree with that. When I get a stack of 50, 60, 70 resumes, I look at it very quickly. And the information that needs to be emphasized, it better be emphasized, or else the person who's reviewing it is going to miss it. And again, I'll show you ways to really make sure that the right information is emphasized. Both appearance of the resume as well as the substance of the resume are important. And I'll show you an example of how the formatting or the appearance makes a huge difference. And there are different types of resumes, the chronological, and really we should call that the reverse chronological because we put the most recent stuff first within each subsection, followed by older stuff. And then there's a functional, which really focuses on the skills that you have versus a reverse chronological ordering of your experience, education, so on. And then there's a combined resume type, but really we're going to focus on the chronological because this is what most early career people use, and really even probably people who've been out in the field for a while. All right, with that said, let's go on. And you need to make sure you customize each resume to each position. So you don't just generate one resume and it goes out to everybody. You may need to reorder some of your categories, such as putting skills first or experience first or education first, depending upon what it is that you're applying for. With that said, when it comes to appearance, if you're going to print that resume and mail it off to somebody, which, is less frequently done, but you want to do that on 8.5 by 11-inch white or off-white quality paper with black type. There were resume books back like 40 years ago, but people still preach this information that you should put your resume on like a colored paper so it stands out in the crowd. Resumes, I always say, yes, it does. I can see it in the trash can from clear across the room when you send me a bright yellow resume with red font. So it's best to be conservative and be professional. Next, it can be 1 to 2 pages. There are a lot of faculty or resume experts that'll tell you should never go over 1 page. I would disagree with that because sometimes you may have enough relevant experience that it's better to put it on 2 pages instead of trying to crowd it onto 1. But even saying that, don't try to put it on 2 pages just to make it look like you have more information. And you should always be very concise in what you write. So I think for most people, 1 page is probably sufficient, but I do think 2 pages is acceptable. You need to have plenty of white spaces between your main sections to really draw attention to where you want the eye to go. Again, we'll show you some examples of this later. Don't use columns. I've been noticing that like in the Microsoft Word templates. They had some with columns. It seems like they may be moving away from that, hopefully. I noticed that a lot of the templates I see online have columns, but it really creates problems for scanning software to get the information in correctly. And it really creates problem for individuals' eye tracking, because if you've got columns, the eye doesn't really know where to go. And what we want that eye to do is to go right down the resume and to exactly see what we want them to see. No errors, erasures, or handwriting. That may be okay for freshman level, psychology class, but it is not okay for a resume. The way that I always think about it is, the resume should be the best work that you ever do, because this is your professional representation of yourself. And if you have a single error on that resume that you then fix in handwriting or you erase or whatever you do, if you have a single error on that, then how can I expect that you will do better than that on the work that you produce for me as your future boss or as your future advisor in a graduate program? So no errors. You need to have multiple people look at that to make sure that there is absolutely not a single error on there. And no color. One of the problems with color is that a lot of times resumes do get copied or even printed, and then if you're using color to emphasize points, then it is not going to be emphasized. Not to mention, today we still kind of view color as not being as professional. A lot of design people will make it super fancy, but then you get somebody who looks at it and what they really think is it's super fancy and not professional. So I always feel like still to this day, it's best just to be as professional as possible. I do think this is changing, but for now, I would still err on the side of caution and go with no color. And no graphics, pictures, or photos. We don't want somebody's conscious or unconscious biases impacting an individual's view of your resume because you have a photo and you don't know if they're going to discriminate because of your age, your ethnicity, your gender, whatever the case may be. And as far as graphics, the only graphic I could potentially think of that would be okay would possibly be a QR code that then would direct people, if they scan that QR code, right to, say your LinkedIn page or your academia page or your ResearchGate page or so on. All right, as far as the appearance itself, don't use all caps in a resume. People still use all caps when they type stuff, and it's just crazy because all caps are much, 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 much at 100 muches. They're more difficult to read. I'm a whole word reader, so if you use all caps, I don't see the structure of the word, and it makes it more challenging for me to read it quickly. If you do need to use caps to emphasize a point, then use small caps instead. But again, use it very sparingly. Say, for example, like just a major heading like experience or skills, and that would be the only time I would ever use it in basically anything you ever do. Next, don't underline in a resume. If you take a look there in the document where we see the pay, jog, jetty, quay, that's pretty difficult to read because those letters P, Y, J, Q all go underneath that line. It also is going to interfere with the optical character recognition if somebody's scanning your resume, but it definitely decreases its readability. So use bold to emphasize. And definitely use bold, sparingly so that it really pulls the eye where you want it. You can use italics, but you should use italics even more sparingly because italics doesn't read as quickly as bold. If you are going to print it, laser print it. If you do print it with an inkjet printer, make sure you're using inkjet paper. So next, no staples. So if you do mail it in, don't put a staple in it because whoever then takes that staple out so they can copy it and distribute it to the people at the organization, they're not going to be as careful as you would. And if it jams the printer up, that's just what's going to happen. They're not going to try to fix that for you. All right, now let's take a look at the education category. So as far as degrees, this is the format that we would see in a lot of templates online. The problem with this we don't know where the eye goes. Do we focus on the all caps? Do we focus on the bold? Or do we focus on the dates that's way over to the right, which to me is just crazy because the date is not that important that we want the eye to actually track clear to the other side of the page. Remember, our goal is to get the eye to track straight down the page. So a little bit of an improved version would be this. Now we have the date that's moved over here. Next to the information, we have the bold on top because we want to emphasize a degree over the university, and we don't have anything in all caps. But I still think this can be improved as well. Instead of having a range of date, which could be a liability, somebody looks at it and says, wow, why were they in school for 6 years or 8 years or 20 years? Instead, what we should do is just simply put the date of graduation. Now, I still think that even this can be improved. For anybody where the degree is important, we don't have to spell out Bachelors of Arts. Everybody where the degree is important is going to know that BA means Bachelor of Arts. So this is very succinct. It's very clear. At a glance, I see that you got your BA in psychology in May 2018 from California State University, Northridge, the university where I am a professor. So one of the things that I see sometimes students in my department do is they put an emphasis in some area. Well, we don't have an official emphasis. So if they do that, they are misrepresenting themselves. If you took 3 or 4 classes in social psychology, that is not an official emphasis, and so it should not be listed on the resume. If it is important to note that you have taken these additional courses in social psychology, that would be more for a cover letter or a personal statement where you can show why that's relevant to the job. Another thing that you may want to consider is that if you don't have the degree yet, then you should say something like expected in May 2018, or you could say graduation date, May 2018, so that it's very clear that the degree is not currently in hand. So what if you have an associate's degree or master's degrees? Well, let's take a look at that. So in this case, we have a person who has a bachelor's in psychology that's expected in May 2018 from CSUN, but they also have an AA in sociology that they got 2 years prior in May 2016 from College of the Canyons. You'll notice I put the city and state here because College of the Canyons does not give us that information. If I say California State University, Northridge, that's telling you that this is in California and that it's in Northridge. So if it's not obvious, then you need to put the city and state just to help the reader have some clarity about where you got that at. This is something you should not include. If you took transfer credits at some other community college, don't include that. The only thing that you should be including are places where you actually got a degree. Next, don't include your high school diploma unless you do not have a college degree. If you don't have a college degree and you're not currently working on a college degree, then I think it's very appropriate to include a high school diploma. Or if you have a GED, then I would include that in the place that you received it. Otherwise, don't include high school diploma. Next, I think it's appropriate to include certifications that are relevant to what it is you're applying. CPR, first aid, or for those who are interested in research, you may have taken this national certification program. Maybe you're a certified addiction counselor. Lots and lots of certifications out there. Maybe you have a certification in human resources. So what you want to do is list those certifications. I believe it's all part of education. It's just a lower level of education than an actual college degree. But I put it as part of education instead of making it a separate area because to me, it's part of education. I can't say that enough times. Also, you may want to include trainings that you have. So look at the bottom of this slide here. If you've completed a lot of continuing education outside of your college coursework, then you might want to summarize it and say something like, 60 plus hours of continuing education in human resource management, leadership skills, and so on. Now, if you have a master's degree where there's actually, or a bachelor's that actually has an official option in that program, then you should list that option, whichever that option is. So in this case, what we see is we have a master's in family consumer sciences, and we have an option, which is the official option, Consumer Affairs and Family Studies. And in this case, they also had a thesis, so the thesis is listed. Now notice something else that's on this one, which are the GPAs. It's always tricky as to whether or not to include a GPA, so I'm going to give you Plunk's rule of thumb with no empirical evidence to support this whatsoever. I kind of believe that if you have, a GPA that's close to 4.0, why not include it? But do not include your major GPA and then just say like 3.95 GPA unless it's specifically your major. And by the way, if you just say 3.95 major GPA, I'm going to automatically assume your overall GPA is lower. So if you are going to include your major GPA, I would include both GPAs. If you graduated summa cum laude, then I would probably include that as well. If you're going to include a GPA for your master's, but not your bachelor's or associates, I automatically would make the assumption that your GPA was substantially lower. So always think that through. If you're including it in one place, include it everywhere. All right. And I don't know if I showed it, but if you had a minor, you could include the minor right below the BA. So if you had a BA in psychology, but a minor in, say, child and adolescent development, just put minor and then put child and adolescent development. All right, when it comes to experience, I think there's a few things we need to emphasize. First, you should emphasize the job title over the place. For example, if you emphasize California State University, Northridge, well, at CSUN, you could be a professor, you could be the president, you could be a custodian, you could be a dean, you could be a lecturer, you could be an administrative assistant. And so what really matters in is what you actually did at the place, and that's where you want to draw the attention to, the title over the place. Also, do not exaggerate anything. Don't try to make anything look better than it actually is. All the time I have students who come in with their resumes and they have glorified something, making it sound super impressive, and when I ask them a question about that bullet, it's very clear that they had exaggerated. And as soon as I figure that out, everything else on that resume becomes suspect to me. There should never be any exaggeration and no falsifications on a resume or your cover letter or your personal statement, because if there is, I'm pretty much just not going to consider you, period. But I'm definitely going to question everything else in your materials. Next, use action verbs. When you're describing your job duties, always start with a past tense action verb for a past job, like conducted, supervised, developed, managed, organized. And, you could put those in present tense for current jobs, but you could actually put it in past tense as well, because, you were doing that before you wrote the resume. So I just usually put them all in past tense. It makes it easier for me. But next, quantify your accomplishments when you can. If you increase sales by 55%, put it on there. If you increase the number of clients, in that region, put that on there. Those are very important. Focus on your marketable skills, but leave off obvious job duties. Let's say, for example, that you're working as, let's say, a barista at a coffee shop. We know that you're going to be making coffee. You don't need to put that on there. If you're a server at a restaurant, we know that you're going to be, maybe cleaning tables or taking orders. We get it. What's more important are the marketable skills. Do you provide outstanding or effective customer service? Do you train or mentor new people in that position? Are you the stand-in assistant manager when the manager is off? Do you engage in the opening and closing of, the store? These are things that are not obvious because not everybody gets to do those. And so those are also marketable skills. So I just wanted to put a few specific examples. So for example, if you are a teacher or a teaching assistant in elementary school, it's not really that important that you're a hall or playground or bathroom monitor. That's, so what? But what is important, what is the grade that you actually taught? Was there a specific population of students? You know, were they students with developmental disabilities? Was it a full inclusion classroom that included students from very different backgrounds of ability and disability? So those are the things that make you stand out. Not that you were a hall or playground or bathroom monitor. We get that. You know, if you're a teaching assistant at a university, you need to identify the course number and title. A lot of times I'll see students just say Psych 150. I'm like, I don't know what Psych 150 is. And so then, you know, you want to say Psych 150 Introduction to Psychology. Sometimes they'll just list the name of the class, but then I don't know what level the class is. So it's important to list both of those. If you're a research assistant, focus more on what you did in that lab versus what the lab does. You could put 20 bullets about what the lab does, but maybe you're not involved in any of those. And so really emphasize what are the skills that you have that you're bringing to the table because of stuff that you have done in that lab. And also don't list the funding that you worked on in that research unless you wrote that grant. I mean, I've had students in my lab that may have been funded from 2 or 3 different grants. So what are they supposed to do? List all 3 of those grants? I mean, I've had students who've gone on to PhD programs who may work underneath 5 or 6 different grants in the time that they're in their PhD. And it's not their grant, you know, their advisor or a different faculty member wrote the grant, not them. So this is not a professional representation of somebody else's work. This is your work. And don't list supervisors. The only place I really ever see this occur consistently is for research and teaching assistantships. And the faculty that advocate for this always say, well, you know, it's name recognition. And my thought is, you know, if that name is important, then that name is going to be in your cover letter. It's going to be or your personal statement. You're probably going to have a letter from them. It's probably going to be on your LinkedIn or academia page as people that you collaborated with or worked with. But the resume itself is a professional representation of you. So we don't need to draw attention to other people's names on your resume because these names are already in your job search materials, such as your recommendation letters, so that the name recognition is clearly there. Next. When we take a look at this page right here, so if you review this for 15 seconds, then, you know, I'll ask you some questions about it. And normally what happens, remember, is that the resume is oftentimes looked at for 7 seconds to 30 seconds. And so we're looking at one little part of a resume for 15 seconds. And we are rarely looking at a resume at the same time or in isolation. We're usually doing it at the same time as we're doing other things like people calling us, people hollering at us, people walking by. So even though I'm distracting you right now while you're supposed to be looking at this information, that's the norm. And so then, you know, it's very important to recognize this. So with that said, if I were going to ask you, what is the average time the person worked at the organizations on that resume I just showed you? And how many places did the person work? So I do this activity in my class. I will ask them these 2 questions, and I actually give them 30 seconds, which is a time that normally people would have for the whole resume. And what they normally answer is that the person worked at 2 places and that the person had an average of like 6 months to a year. But what we really see is that this person, sorry, they will normally say the person worked at 4 places. Let me go back to that, I apologize. Because they don't recognize, they just see 4 jobs, so they think they worked at 4 places. But in actuality, they worked at 2 places. They worked at XYZ organization and they worked at ABC organization. So this is incredibly important because the way that this resume is formatted, somebody who glances at this resume for 7 seconds to 30 seconds may accidentally think that they had 4 different jobs and that each of those jobs were very short. In this case, at the top, we see 3 years. That's good. Here we see, you know, a few months, and here we see 1 to 2 years, and here we see less than 1 year or maybe 1.5 years. at the bottom. So what happens then is that looks like somebody who is a job hopper. We can format this very simply and completely change how this is viewed. So if we take a look now with the exact same information, there's no difference in information here. What we've done is we've collapsed stuff that is actually redundant, and we have now put the job titles for XYZ organization together, and we put the job titles for ABC organization together. And now we see then that what it looks like is that they've been promoted at both places they've worked. And by saying spring 1992 instead of January to May, it ties it to the academic calendar. They were an intern because in the spring, and then they actually got hired from being an intern. That's like impressive. And then their previous job where they started out as data entry and then became a head bookkeeper, they also got promoted. So both jobs they have promotion. So we have taken something that was potentially liabilities, where it looked like they were a job hopper on this with 4 different jobs at 4 different places, which of course is not true, with short jobs, and turned it into something where they actually got promoted and worked longer at each place, so they show job loyalty. Now, another thing that I see the same person might do that's problematic is this. Okay, so what we see here, we have the same duties, but instead what we see is they only listed their top positions, sales associate and head bookkeeper. And this is very much problematic. First, for the sales association, it doesn't show the promotion from intern, and that's important to demonstrate. For the head bookkeeper, it also does not show promotion, but it also misrepresents. They were not a head bookkeeper for 3 years. So you should not just put your last job duty. You need to be very specific and, make sure you show when you get promoted. All right, we could group experience together, and that makes sense on a lot of occasions. For example, in my field, psychology, it may be important if we're applying to a graduate program and we have both research, clinical, and teaching and other experience, then actually group our experience in those 4 manners. Other people may group their experience, and they may just have experience and other experience. And that works okay too. So it draws the attention to the more relevant experience, but then also demonstrates other experience. Now, some of my very esteemed colleagues who know a lot more than I do in most everything, they a lot of times will say, don't list other experience. But I usually argue this because your other experience, let's say you worked in fast food for 5 years at the same place. So let's say you were working at El Pollo Loco in the drive-through and the front for 5 years. That says a lot about your character, because there's a high turnover in fast food or retail or hospitality industries. And so if you have job loyalty for 5 years while you're going to school, that says something about you as an individual and a person. You're somebody I want to hire. It also says that you have the ability to interact with not only your colleagues and your bosses, but also with all these people who come in to order food from you in all different moods, from all different backgrounds and so on. That's why I say list the other experience, at least initially when you first in your early career. All right, another thing that you might want to do is if you have a bunch of short-term jobs, in the same industry, let's say that you have jumped from one fast food place to another, one retail sales position to another, or worked in different other areas of hospitality, like different restaurants or coffee shops or whatever. You might just want to collapse them together and just say like over 2 years experience in the hospitality industry, where I provided excellent customer service and positively resolved customer issues. That way we're not putting 3 short-term jobs that were all like 6 months each that then could be a liability. I have an example of that on my resume template. I'll show you how to get to that later. Another thing about other experience is that, like I was just saying, even though you may think other experience is not relevant, people reviewing your resume may think it's very relevant. When I hired people for a statewide evaluation project, I wanted people who had worked in either retail or fast food or some other area of hospitality, hotel, restaurants, because I could train people in the actual research skills, but what I needed were people who could develop rapport just immediately. And so I actually was looking for that. All right, now a question I get a lot is, should I list this as experience or is this really an activity? So for example, I always say, look, if your volunteer work was treated like an unpaid job, so you had a set hours, you had to be there, you had specific responsibilities, and if you didn't show up, that job might not get done, I would list it as experience. So if I were a peer educator at one of the programs at University Counseling Services, then I would list that as experience. Because, for example, like we have a project where they go and they give presentations on depression, suicide awareness, and prevention. And so these individuals not only get lots of training, which I would make sure I put on my resume, but they also then set up where they go in and they give presentations in classrooms or community groups. And then if they don't show up to those presentations, you know, that's not good. And so I think that's very relevant experience. Now, I would not list volunteer work as experience if it's like a one-time event. It's just an activity. If I show up for an AIDS walk or a breast cancer walk, or I go set up like an event like a Pride event, you know, then those are activities. If it's really limited in the scope, like if I'm the member of a Child and Adolescent Development Association or the member of the biology club, those are pretty limited in scope. Those are activities. And if it's more than one time, but it's infrequent, like Student Senate, which meets, I don't know, once a month or whatever it meets, or if I'm board of director for a nonprofit organization that meets once a year or once every 3 months or even once a month, then those are really activities and not experience. You still get credit for them on the resume. And I will tell you, from a person who used to hire people, I like it when I see especially students, but also professionals in the field who are out in the community or who are actively involved at their university, because it shows that they're more committed, you know, to their communities beyond just, you know, going to school or beyond just their job. So I like that, because let's face it, the first question you're going to get asked oftentimes when you meet somebody, when you're out volunteering, is, where do you work? And now you're a good testament for my agency. As far as activities, I like to actually break them out into categories if I have enough. So professional activities would actually be like professional organizations. Say, for example, like the American Psychological Association or the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Community activities are going to be things like Toastmasters or parent-teacher organization or breast cancer walk, or if you're going and you're volunteering just every once in a while whenever you have time at a local, senior citizen center, you know, where, again, you're just showing up, you know, occasionally, periodically, then those are more community activities. And then university activities are, of course, going to be the clubs, you know, on your campus, like marketing club, rodeo club, or fraternities and sororities or athletics. Now, one thing I would like to point out about fraternities and sororities is a lot of times they require their members to go into the community and volunteer. But the fraternity actually sets up this event. And I think it's a little bit misrepresented when somebody who's in a fraternity or sorority and they say volunteer at like 20 different, you know, nonprofit organizations where they're just like one-time events. And then underneath community activities, they list all 20 of these agencies they went and volunteered. I would say it's more honest to actually have as a bullet the name of the fraternity or sorority, and then have a little dash and say, participated in 150 plus hours of community volunteer work at various nonprofit organizations in the community. That would be much more honest than listing every single one of those one-day events that you participated in simply because fraternity required it. So a couple other things that should be noted is that you should always list the dates of affiliation. So if you do the breast cancer walk in, say, October 2019, then I would put that. If you were a member of American Psychological Association from 2018 to 2020, I would put that, or 2018 to present, I would put that. Don't put it on there without the affiliation, because it makes me always think you're just hiding that you only joined it for a short time period. And don't join an organization only to get it on your resume. If you're going to join, be involved. Because I, as an interviewer, I'm going to ask you questions about that. So if I ask you about your involvement with the, say, biology club on campus, and then you have this blank look on your face, I know that you basically just paid the dues to be involved in it without actually doing anything in the club. And so it's like a strike against you. So also list any leadership roles in the activity. So if you're in the rodeo club and you're elected as vice president and then president, I'd put that on there. Vice president 2018-19, president 2019-20. Okay. As far as skills, I usually advocate for not listing soft skills on your resume. I notice a lot of the templates online have them, but I think it's more important to really put those soft skills in your cover letter or personal statement and show how they relate specifically to the job. Because inevitably what I see on these resumes that list soft skills is they just put a whole bunch of soft skills that they may or may not be good at, like communication skills. They may say excellent, but are they really excellent at that? What I advocate instead is really focus your attention then on language skills, technology, computer, industry specific software, and so on. So I just put a few examples of how you could list it. Notice in the languages, I actually had listed like your fluency, but for other things, I don't typically have my students list their competency because they always overestimate their capabilities. Inevitably, they would say something like, I am proficient in Microsoft Word. And I say, oh, so you know how to use styles? And they're like, what? And I'm like, okay, you're not proficient. Or they'll say, I am proficient in Excel. And like, so you can link, Excel spreadsheets together. Like, I didn't even know it did that. And like, okay, you're not proficient. As far as the operating systems, if you are only good in Macintosh and iOS, I would leave off operating systems. If you're only good in Windows and Android, I would leave it off. Because if you only put Windows and Android, what that tells me is that you're no good in Macintosh and iOS. So if you're good in all four of those, put them on there. If not, just leave that whole thing off. If you have like research and statistics skills, like for example, if you know M+, EQS, SPSS, SAS, these are all like stat programs, and put statistics and list the ones that you know. If you know Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Google Analytics, then list that as, research and stat skills. Another area that you could list here would be data visualization programs that you know. As far as honors, I would say first, don't say honors and awards. They are synonyms of each other. If you say synonym of award, honor is one of the words. If you say synonyms of honors, awards comes up. So if you're going to say honors and awards, you might as well say honors and awards and accomplishments and recognitions. Yeah, you get the idea. All right, just choose one. I like the word honors, but maybe you like the word recognitions better. Anyway. So underneath honors, you could also list like scholarships and fellowships and so on. Some of my colleagues really advocate very strongly for putting honors at the top of the resume. Their idea, and their idea is justified, is that it shows immediately the reader of the resume how amazingly awesome you are from the very beginning. I actually have a different opinion on that. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but I do have a different opinion, which is, I don't think they should be at the top. I think what should be at the top instead are things that the person who's reviewing your resume is actually looking for. So I advocate for putting whatever it is that are part of the job description, such as education or experience or skills, depending on what it is that's on the job description. I also think that honors are really hard to compare across organizations or institutions. For example, I got the John F. Kennedy Memorial Award in the university where I went and did my undergraduate. But what does that really mean in comparison to awards at other universities or other departments? And so then because they're hard to quantify and because they're hard to really do a meaningful comparison, then I kind of feel like that they are not as important in regards to the resume as are things that are actually being asked for in the job announcement or in the program if you're applying to graduate programs they're looking for. I like to put honors at the very end. So in my mind, what happens is this, is that they see how awesome you are because you have this experience and skills that they're looking for. And at the very end, they're like, holy cow, and this person has all these honors. Wow, this person is even more amazing than I thought. Versus somebody who has a bunch of honors, they read that, and then, you know, they look later and see they don't have the skills or education. Anyway, that's just Plunk's personal opinion, not supported by empirical evidence. Another thing I'd like to point out about honors, you know, if you're making a good GPA, you're probably going to get a lot of emails from honor societies, and my response is this about that. Don't join an honor society just to boost your resume. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference on your resume, no matter what that email tells you. Those organizations are going to tell you that they have lots of funding available for scholarships, and I'm going to tell you that they may have a lot of funding, but there are very few people who actually get those scholarships. Because think about this, if we have this national society of whatever, I don't know, the Plunk Honor Society, you know, you're going to have to be amazingly involved in that organization, that honor society, before you're going to get or be competitive for that scholarship. So my thought is, if you're going to join an honor society, don't do it for your resume unless you become extremely involved and try to get leadership positions at the regional or state or national level. That's the way you get the scholarship. And then if I ask you a question about that in an interview and I say, hey, it says there you're a member of the Plunk Honor Society. What did you do for that? And you're like, I paid the dues. Yeah, that's not the answer you want. You want to say, well, I helped, you know, publicize it, you know, on our campus. I organized events, you know, where people came in and gave resume presentations and leadership talks to our students or our members. So only join it if you're going to be actively involved and try to get a leadership position. All right. I think there's some questionable resume categories, the first of which is a job objective. We still have people that advocate for a job objective, although I have to tell you that more and more I don't see them, and I personally am in the group that says don't include one. But the pro of a job objective is that you can modify the job objective on each resume to fit a specific job description, but if you're posting that online, then that job objective is really going to be pretty worthless. The job objective could give the employer more insight into your goal, but this is where it starts getting problematic. First, a job objective is going to be redundant with your cover letter or your personal statement and other information on the resume. So for example, in a cover letter, the very first sentence I would write is, I'm very interested in the Big Brother, Big Sister coordinator position at XYZ organization. So why do I need it on the resume if it's my first sentence in my cover letter? Next, by saying that I am very interested in the Big Brother, Big Sister program on my cover letter, it is not saying I'm not interested in other stuff, which is kind of the implied meaning if I have a job objective on my resume that says, I want to be a Big Brother, Big Sister coordinator. That's the only thing I want to do. That's pretty much the implied meaning of a job objective that's that specific. And so then you might not be considered for other jobs that don't precisely match the objective. But if I just have a cover letter that says, hey, I'm interested in this position you have available, that's not saying I'm not interested in other positions. As a matter of fact, your last sentence in your cover letter might be, I look forward to talking with you about any opportunities you may have at XYZ organization that are a good fit with my background. Another thing that's a problem with job objectives is they're oftentimes so broad, like to acquire a management position. Well, do you mean, middle management? Do you mean restaurant management? Do you mean assistant management? What do you mean by that? You know, it doesn't mean anything. And like I said a minute ago, a lot of times it's too specific. And then third, most of the time what I see as job objectives are just meaningless. And this is one I used to have. To acquire a position that will enhance personal and professional growth. What does that really even mean? It was a waste of my time to type it on every one of those resumes because, you know, back then I had to type those resumes. And it's a waste of your time to read it if you're reviewing my resume. So avoid job objective in my personal humble opinion. Next, personal information like marital status, children, age, ethnicity. All of that is terrible to include on a resume because they can result in conscious or unconscious bias. Some of the things I've seen on resumes: number of dogs, number of cats, number of kids, spouse's name, spouse's occupation. These are crazy. Don't include any of those. Next, hobbies. Don't include a hobby unless it is 100% relevant to the position. If you're applying to Dick's Sporting Goods or REI and you are an avid rock climber, mountain biker, blah, 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 okay, fine, include it because it's going to be relevant to your position. Otherwise, for the most part, hobbies, again, can result in unconscious or conscious bias. And references. Do not include your references on your resume, and do not include a thing that says references available upon request. Or like I used to say, excellent character and professional references available upon request. Again, a waste of my time to type, a waste of your time to read, and here is why. First off, character references normally don't matter. What we're looking for is professional references. Second, we know that everybody has references, even if they have to pay somebody to be a reference or, put their mom's name with a different last name on their, job search materials. But really a big reason is because references should not be distributed unless they're asked for, because we should respect our references' time. I have had students who have sent out references on their resume and they did a shotgun approach where they sent out the reference to 100 or 200 places, or they posted online. And now my contact information is publicly available. And also I may get phone calls from places that I don't even know the student sent it to. And you need to nurture your references. And we'll have a whole nother video on how to nurture those references. So only hand out those references when they're asked for, and then let your reference know that you gave out their name and contact information. All right. Things to avoid on the resume: past or expected salaries. I personally don't put that on the job application either. Unfortunately, a lot of job applications now are online and they're requiring some information there. My problem with giving out that information is that if I'm applying for a different position that has different requirements, then my past salary should have no relevance on that other than for you to lowball me with the salary. Or if my past salary was really high, I made more money before I came back into academia. And so if I had listed my salary on my resume or job application, a place that couldn't pay that salary may not have been interested in even giving me an interview. So I think it's very problematic. So I usually put not applicable or leave it blank. And if I were filling out an online application that required it, personally, I would probably put zeros in there, because it's not their, they don't need to know that unless I want to share that information with them. They're not obligated to have that information, but you have to make that decision on your own, what you want to do in that situation. Don't put why you left a previous position, with maybe one exception. Let's say you were a manager and you moved down to a assistant manager position or a on-call manager, and maybe you did that because you went back to school. In that situation, I might list it. Otherwise, I would leave it off your resume and off the application. Don't put any slang words unless it's very specific to your industry that you're applying to. And don't include any abbreviations. All the time I see people that will include abbreviations. Sometimes they include it instead of writing out what it is. So if they had NCFR, I'd be like, well, what the heck is NCFR? Now I know, because I'm a family scientist, that NCFR is National Council on Family Relations, but somebody else reading your resume may not know. Another thing that people do all the time is they'll put, in their professional affiliations activities, they'll say National Council on Family Relations, and then in parentheses put NCFR. Why did you add the parentheses? We don't need that. Just say the name of it, National Council on Family Relations. The only exception to that, of course, would be if you said, Northridge, instead of writing out California, just put CA for California, or Enid, comma, Oklahoma. Okay for Oklahoma. That'd be the only exception. Don't list multiple phone numbers, emails, or home addresses. I'm telling you right off the bat, I'm going to contact one of those and that's it. When I'm ready to get hold of you, I will call that one phone number or email that one email. I'm not going to email both, and I'm not going to mail something to multiple addresses. If you're living in the dorm and you also have a home address and you're getting ready to graduate, then just put your home address. Now, as far as if you're posting online, I probably would not have my home address on there and maybe not even my phone number. I'd probably just have my email. If I'm mailing it to somebody or sending it specifically to somebody who requests a copy of my resume, somebody who I've been in contact with, I would make sure that my phone number, email, and home address are on there. Next is don't include your work address or phone number. So that basically tells me that you're willing to do your job search while you're working. And it also tells me that if I hire you, you're going to just be looking for jobs while you're working for me and I'm paying you. And don't have non-professional email addresses. I have had the craziest email addresses you've ever seen appear to me on different job search materials, such as Ecstasy Girl, Big Stud at, and I'm like, really? That's what they're sending their professional representation from? And so, you know, it hopefully should just be your name at wherever. Now, I want to show you something. I'm almost done here, but this is an example of a template that I downloaded and put information in from one of my resume templates. So I put that information in and use their format, and notice that your eye does not know where to go and what to emphasize. So in this situation, we don't know whether on the education to look at the place or the degree or the major, the date. I mean, it's just crazy. It is so out of control. And then we have this extra space when it comes to the experience between undergraduate teaching assistant, which is a job title not emphasized, before the bullets. So there's as much information between the title and the bullets as there is between the next job. The eye doesn't know where to go. And again, we have dates and the city and state and everything over here on the right. It's just out of control, crazy. Then on activities, we have the word member for homeless shelter fundraiser. Okay, you don't need the word member. We have member youth coordinating council. We don't need the word member. It's just wasted space. We don't have any dates. For the certifications, that should in my mind, be underneath education. And of course, we have honors and awards. And anyway, it's just craziness. I want to show you how changing the format to this with all the exact same information, it's now on one page. And if you glance at that resume in 15 seconds, what you're going to see is a BA in psychology with a minor in child care administration, an associate's degree in child development. They have some certifications that are relevant. They were an undergraduate teaching assistant in psychology. They were an after-school program coordinator, and they were promoted from an after-school program worker. They were an intern, and they were produce manager and promoted from clerk. They've been involved in a couple of community activities, a university activity, and they have multiple honors. All of that I got and was able to articulate to you verbally in just a few seconds. So you can do this if you download one from the internet, or you can do this, your choice. What do you want to do knowing that they're going to look at your resume for 7 to 30 seconds? All right, with that said, you can find more information about resumes and VITAs, which are resumes used in academia. They're longer. And you can find also templates for both of those and some other cool stuff on this webpage, which I will put in the comments below the YouTube video. Thank you for showing up today, and good luck with everything. I really send you lots of good thoughts for your job search or your graduate school search.